The alien medical station floated in deep space far from any planet, its silver hull reflecting the faint light of a distant sun. The corridors were quiet, except for the soft of machines and the blinking of small indicator lights. Dr. Zeeler moved through the hall, with quick steps, his tall, thin frame gliding past the other alien staff, who were busy with their duties. Zeeler was known as one of the most skilled doctors in the sector. His hands could perform the most delicate surgery, and his mind could solve the most difficult cases, but nothing in his long career could prepare him for what was about to happen. A sharp alarm echoed through the medbay, breaking the calm. The bright red light flashed across the room. A voice from the intercom announced a rescue vessel was approaching. Emergency patient on board, life signs unstable. Dr. Zeeler ordered the surgical room to be prepared and called for the med drones to be ready. The nurses rushed to sterilize the area while the machines began warming up the scanners. Moments later, the outer doors opened and the rescue team entered. Carrying a stretcher on it lay a human male, his body covered in burns, his clothing torn and blackened from fire, deep cuts across his arms and legs, one side of his face swollen and bruised. Dr. Zeeler had treated hundreds of patients over the years, but the sight of this human made even him pause. The man's chest rose and fell weakly, but his pulse was faint, as if fading away. At any moment, the rescue team reported that he had been pulled from a collapsed mining platform on a nearby asteroid. There had been explosions, fire, and toxic gas. No other survivors were found. Zeeler began scanning the patient. His eyes narrowed as the readings appeared on the display. The numbers did not make sense. The oxygen level in the human's blood was dangerously low, yet somehow the brain was still active. The heart was beating irregularly, but it refused to stop. The doctor muttered under his breath, "He should be dead, yet he is not." The med drones moved in, inserting tubes and delivering emergency fluids, but the human's body reacted in strange ways. The healing serum was absorbed too. Quickly, the medication that should slow the heart had no effect. The nurses exchanged worried looks. Some whispered to each other, saying no one from their own species could survive this level of damage for more than a few minutes. The human had been in this condition for at least an hour before being brought here, and yet he was still alive. Dr. Zeeler leaned closer, listening to the uneven breathing and feeling the faint heat coming from the burned skin. There was something strange in the way the human's body was. Holding on it was as if every cell refused to give up. A sudden warning tone came from the scanner. The human's heart stopped for 2 long seconds, then started again on its own. No shock, no machine, just raw instinct. The aliens in the room froze, watching the display. The nurse asked if they should try to stabilize him, but Zeeler raised a hand, telling them to wait. He wanted to see how far this body could go on its own. The heart rate rose slowly until it was back to an irregular but stubborn rhythm. They moved him onto the surgical table, the bright lights above casting sharp shadows across the human's face. The burns were deep and painful. Looking, the bone in his left arm was cracked almost into the internal scan, showed bleeding inside the chest, yet the blood loss was less than expected, as if the body had already begun to slow the bleeding on its own. Zeeler began working his hand steady as he repaired the worst of the wounds, but his mind kept returning to the impossible scans and the strange reaction of the human's body. The med drones brought fresh tools and sealed the burns with advanced tissue, repair gel. The human twitched slightly, even though he was under sedation. Zeeler adjusted the sedation levels, but noted that the human's resistance to the drug was higher than normal. The body kept trying to wake itself up, as if refusing to surrender control. The doctor had seen strong wills before, but this was different. It was like watching a machine that refused to power down no matter how damaged. Minutes passed, turning into hours. Every time they thought the human was slipping away, some change would happen. The breathing would deepen, the pulse would strengthen, the bleeding would slow. Zeeler spoke quietly to the nurses, telling them to keep monitoring every change. He wanted to record this case in full detail. It might be the most unusual patient he would ever treat. The smell of burned fabric and scorched metal still clung to human's clothes. The rescue team had said he was found in the wreckage of a reactor room where temperatures were high enough to melt steel. His survival there for even a minute should have been impossible. Yet, according to their report, he had been trapped inside for several minutes before they could reach him. When they found him still moving, trying to pull another injured miner out from under a beam. That miner had already died, but the human had not stopped trying until his body finally collapsed. Zeeler finished sealing the last deep cut and checked the monitors again. The numbers were still wrong, but somehow stable. The brain activity showed strange spikes, as if memories or dreams were flashing rapidly. The oxygen level was climbing slowly without any mechanical help. The alien doctor stepped back, taking a long look at the man on the table. He looked fragile, burned, broken, yet there was something that set his jaw and the shape of his brow that seemed to speak of defiance even in unconsciousness. The other medics stood quietly. Now no one was whispering. They all watched the monitors, and the slow rise and fall of the humans' chesty air in the room fell heavy, as if everyone knew they were seeing something rare, something that did not happen in ordinary life. One of the nurses whispered to Zealer, asking if humans were all like this. Zealer did not answer. He simply kept watching the patient, wondering how much pain and damage his body could take, before it finally stopped fighting. The hum of the machines was the only sound now, the beeping of the monitors, steady and stubborn like the man himself. Zealer felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, not fear, not exactly admiration, either something deeper, a question forming in his mind. What kind of creature was this human, and how far could he go before death could claim him? He had read about humans before, but always in dry reports from trade officials or medical summaries. Nothing had prepared him for the real thing, the living, breathing proof that here was a being that defied the normal rules of survival. In the observation window high above the medbay, two senior administrators watched the scene, their eyes on the strange patient. One asked quietly if they should quarantine him, fearing his biology might cause unknown effect on the station. The other shook his head, saying they should wait and see, but both agreed this was no ordinary case. Somewhere in the quiet hum of the medbay, the human's chest rose and fell again, steady and strong against all logic. Zealer turned to the nurses and ordered them to prepare for long-term care. The patient would remain here under his watch. He wanted no one else interfering. The human had earned that much respect from him already. As the doctor looked down again, he noticed a faint twitch of a finger, the smallest movement, but enough to make him pause. Perhaps the man was already trying to wake. Even now, lying there with more injuries than most could survive, he was still trying to come back. The lights above seemed to burn brighter, the shadows around the room sharper. Zealer felt as if the air itself had changed. The human was not just a patient now. He was a mystery, one that demanded answers. And until he found him, the doctor knew he would not rest. A faint heartbeat continued in the background, a sound that should have been impossible. Yet here it was, stubborn and alive like the man himself, refusing to let go no matter what. The medbay remained quiet except for the steady hum of machines and the slow, stubborn beat of the human's heart. Dr. Zealer stood beside the bed, his tall frame casting a shadow over the sleeping figure. The faint light from the monitors flickered across the human's burned skin. The numbers on display still refused to match any normal medical chart. The oxygen levels too low, yet stable. The blood pressure irregular, yet holding the brain activity pulsing with sudden sharp peaks and dips that made no sense to alien medicine. The nurses had taken shift, watching the patient through the night, each reporting strange changes in his condition. Sometimes his breathing would slow so much they thought he had stopped. Then, without warning, it would surge again strong and deep. Other times the heart would pause, as if considering giving up, then beat with renewed force. Dr. Zealer recorded each event, carefully speaking into the log with a calm voice, though inside he felt the weight of questions piling up like heavy stones. As the new cycle began, the first light from the distant sun glimmered across the hull of the station. The medbay doors slid open, and a supply cart rolled in carrying fresh nutrient packs. The nurses connected one to the patient's line. But within minutes, the system warned of unusual absorption rates. The human's body was pulling the nutrients at double the expected speed and breaking them down even faster, as if every cell was hungry and working overtime. Zealer leaned in, scanning the bloodstream. He saw something that made his mind freeze for a moment. Tiny defensive structures moving in the blood like living soldiers. They attacked damaged tissue, fought infection, and even dismantled the foreign medication in ways no alien system could do. One nurse whispered that perhaps the man had been enhanced with hidden implants, but Zealer shook his head. No metal, no synthetic code, only natural biological structure, yet far more aggressive and adaptable than anything his medical experience. He ordered the scans repeated, but the results stayed the same. The human's own blood was his best weapon. During the second cycle, the patient stirred under sedation. His hands twitched, his head turned slightly, his lips moved in silent words. Zealer watched closely, trying to catch the sounds, and a faint voice broke the air, a single name spoken like a plea. The nurse looked at the doctor, unsure if they should respond. Zealer leaned closer, asking who the name belonged to, but the human gave no answer, slipping back into a deeper unconscious state. Yet the readings spiked again, his heartbeat speeding for a moment, as if he had been running through some dream. The doctor felt an unease grow inside him. The human was healing, yet not in the way any patient should. The burns were shrinking, the bone fractures knitting faster than normal, the bleeding already sealed by the body's own efforts. But the process came with dangerous swings in temperature and pressure. Twice the fever rose, So high, the nurse reached for coolant injections, and twice Zealer stopped her, wanting to see if the body could handle it alone both times. The fever broke by itself, and the man's vitals returned to their strange, steady state. In the observation deck above the medbay, 2 senior alien doctors arrived to watch. They spoke quietly about the risks of keeping this patient alive. One suggested his biology might create harmful effect for others if it spread or interacted with alien systems. Another argued they should study him fully. While they had the chance, Zealer ignored their debate, his focus locked on the patient, every flicker of muscle, every irregular beat, every strange recovery. Hours passed, and a soft vibration trembled through the station. The rescue team that had brought the man returned, wanted to check on him. Their leader, a tall, scaled alien, approached the bed, looking down at the human with narrow eyes. He said that during the rescue, man had lifted a metal beam far heavier than his size, should allow, then kept moving. Even while breathing toxic fumes, the leader admitted they thought he would drop dead before reaching the shuttle yet. He had stayed on his feet until the very end. Zealer listened without comment, but inside, he felt another piece of the puzzle shift into place. The man's strength was not simply endurance. It was an act of defiance against collapse, as if some deep instinct told his body to keep going no matter the damage. The more he learned, the more he wanted to know, and the less he understood. That night cycle brought new changes. The heart rate steady for the first time since arrival, the breathing smooth into a rhythm, almost calm. Zealer thought the man might finally be resting, but then a violent shiver ran through his body. Alarm sounded as his temperature spiked higher than ever. The nurses moved to intervene. Yet again, Zealer ordered them to wait. The shivering stopped, suddenly replaced by deep, heavy breaths. The scan showed a massive surge of activity inside the bone marrow. New blood cells pouring into the system faster than anything in their records. It was as if the body had decided to rebuild itself from the inside out. The doctor leaned against the console, watching in quiet, while the senior observers above said nothing now. They too were caught in the silent grip of the scene. The human's body had become its own battlefield, a place where injury and recovery clash in real time, and somehow recovery always won. In the early hours, the patient moved again, this time more strongly. His eyes fluttered, but did not open. His hands clenched slightly against the sheets. Zealer stepped closer, speaking in a calm tone, telling him he was safe, telling him to rest. But the man's lips formed another word, this one clear enough for the nurse to hear. It was a command spoken with the weight of habit, something from a battlefield or a place of danger. Zealer wrote it into the log, unsure if it was a clue to his past or just a fragment of memory. The more the human fought his way back, the more the doctor realized how dangerous and rare this kind of resilience was. In a galaxy where most species require precise care and advanced machines to survive such trauma, here was one who seemed to reject both, depending only on himself. Even machines seemed to work differently around him, readings shifting whenever he stirred, as if it could bend the limits of their technology. By the third watch of the day, the man's burns had closed enough to reveal more of his skin beneath, darkened, but intact. The cracked bone showed signs of fusing. Without synthetic supports, the nurse who checked the wound stepped back, whispering that it was like watching days of healing happen in a single cycle. Zealer only nodded, still studying the scans. He had no answer for what he saw, only the certainty that this was not luck or chance. It was design, whether by nature or something else he could not yet say. The air in the medbay felt heavier with each passing hour, not from danger, but from the sense that everyone there was witnessing something important, something that might change their understanding of life itself. The younger nurses kept glancing at the man, as if expecting him to rise and walk away. Even in his state, Zealer understood the feeling. He too felt the weight of expectation pressing in, as if the human might at any moment open his eyes and speak some truth they were not ready to hear. When the shift ended, Zealer refused to leave. He remained beside the bed, watching the steady movements of breath, listening to the stubborn beat in the monitors. He thought about the other species he had treated over the years, all the fragile bodies that gave up under lesser wounds. He thought about the way this man had been found still trying to save another, even as his own life drained away, and he felt something he could not name, a mix of respect, curiosity, and a strange unease. In the quiet moments between the beeps of the monitor, Zealer found himself wondering what this human could do at full strength. If this was how he fought when nearly destroyed, what would he be when whole and unbroken? He did not know the answer, but he knew one thing for certain: he would keep this man alive, not just because it was his duty, but because he had to see the end of this story, whatever it might be. The station moved quietly through the endless dark of space, its engines a faint vibration that no one noticed anymore. Inside the medbay, the strange human patient lay unmoving, but never still, his body shifting slightly. With every stubborn breath, his chest Rising and falling in that same steady defiance, Dr. Zeeler sat at his desk. Reviewing the scans again, the same impossible results appeared, and the same impossible questions grew in his mind. The human's recovery was faster now bones that should need weeks were already almost whole skin that should remain scarred was smoothing over, leaving only faint marks. The medical staff whispered to each other in the corners, wondering how this was possible. Some believed the man must have hidden technology in his body. Others thought his species had secrets no one else in the galaxy knew. Zeeler dismissed these ideas, though deep down he was not sure himself. He decided to run another deep scan, this time focusing on the smallest levels, the micro world within the blood and tissue. The image formed on the screen, and what he saw made him lean forward, eyes narrowing. Thousands of tiny moving defenders, like soldiers marching in unison. They swarmed over damaged areas, repairing them not with machines, not with implants, but with natural processes that acted like advanced engineering. They broke down infection. They recycled dead cells. They built new tissue layer by layer faster than any alien body could hope to match. He called for 2 nurses to assist, and together they began collecting samples for study. The blood shimmered under the light, as if carrying energy of its own when placed under magnification. It almost seemed alive in a way beyond the normal sense of life. Zeeler had studied many rare species across his career, but never had he seen biology act with such will as if the blood itself wanted to keep its owner alive. Hours passed, and the patient stirred again, his head turning on the pillow, his lips moving in a whisper. Zeeler leaned close and heard a single word in the human language. It was not a name this time, but something like an order, the tone sharp and commanding. The nurse glanced at the doctor, unsure of its meaning. Zeeler noted it down and wondered if this man had been a leader among his people, perhaps a soldier, perhaps more than that. Later that cycle, the med bay's main door opened, and a visitor entered. It was the rescue team leader, the scaled alien, who had brought the man, and he stepped to the bedside, looking down at the patient with something like respect. He spoke quietly to Zeeler, describing how during the rescue the human had endured things no one else could. The reactor chamber had been filled with toxic smoke, the heat enough to sear flesh, in seconds the floor unstable. Yet the man had carried another injured miner over his shoulder, moving through falling debris. His arm already broken, his lungs full of poison. Still he refused to stop until they were out. Zeeler listened in silence, every detail confirming what had already begun to suspect, that this humans would survive was unlike anything in the records. When the visitor left, Zeeler returned his notes, writing slowly and carefully. He did not want to lose any thought or observation. Each one felt important, as if a larger picture was forming in his mind. That night the human's body changed again. The temperature rose sharply, the monitors beeping warnings. The nurses moved to cool him, but Zeeler told him to hold back. He wanted to see if the body could resolve the crisis on its own. The heat climbed higher until it seemed dangerous. Then just as quickly it fell back to normal. The scans showed another wave of cellular activity, this time deeper within the bones, more blood cells, more healing agents flooding the system. It was like watching an army regroup and launch a counterattack against the damage. The other doctors on the station began to take interest. They came to the observation deck, watching in silence, some with doubt, others with fascination. Zeeler could feel their eyes on him as he worked, but he did not care. The human was more than a patient now. He was a mystery, a challenge, and Zeeler had no intention of letting that mystery end before he understood it. On the 3rd day since arrival, the burns had faded, the darkened skin, the broken arm, now strong enough for the man to twitch his fingers, the deep cuts no longer raw, but closed with fresh tissue. One nurse commented softly that was like time itself was moving faster inside his body. Zeeler simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the readings, a heartbeat still irregular, but stronger, the oxygen now near normal without any outside aid. Then something unexpected happened. The human's eyes opened for a brief second. They were clouded with pain, but also alert, scanning the room before closing again. Zeeler felt his pulse quicken. He leaned closer, speaking softly, telling him he was safe, telling him to rest. But he knew that look. It was a look of someone assessing a situation, someone trained to wake in strange places and understand them in moments. The man might have been weak, but his mind was still working. The brief awakening seemed to trigger another change. The body began drawing more nutrients again, the metabolism surging, the muscles shifting slightly as if preparing for movement. Zeeler knew it was only a matter of time before the man would be fully awake, and then the real questions would begin. He wondered what answers he might get and whether they would explain anything at all. The cycle ended with the medbay in a strange stillness. Every nurse, every doctor aware that something rare was unfolding. They had seen patients recover. They had seen determination before. But never at this level. The alien staff found themselves watching the human, not just as a patient, but as a symbol of something they could not yet name. Zealer sat at his desk, once more reviewing the images of the man's cells working like tireless soldiers. Repairing, building, defending, it made him think of a story he had once read from an ancient world about warriors who fought not for victory, but simply because they refused to fall. He closed the scans and looked over the bed. The human lay there quiet, but never still. Every breath, every beat, another act of defiance against the odds. Zealer wondered how many more such acts this man had performed before ending up here, and he felt certain that the story was far from over. The lights in the medbay glowed dim as the next cycle began. The alien nurses moved quietly between the equipment, and the patient, their voices kept low as if afraid to disturb the strange human who had become the center of every whispered conversation. Dr. Zealer stood near the bedside, his tall frame still, and watchful, his eyes fixed on a man's face. The burns had faded further, the bone was stronger, the skin no longer raw, yet there was still a tension in the body, a readiness that seemed to live. Even in deep sleep, the monitors continued their soft beeping, the numbers stable, but never quite normal. Zealer adjusted the nutrient feed and watched the humans breathing, each inhale steady, each exhale measured. He had treated soldiers before, patients who carried the marks of war and hardship. This man had the same presence, but something else too, an edge like a blade that refused to dull. The doctor had been reviewing the scans again earlier in the cycle. He found more proof of that relentless healing, the cells multiplying, repairing, adapting in ways alien biology could not match. It was as if his body knew how to fight in 1,000 different ways without a single command from his mind. A faint sound broke the silence, a soft murmur from the patient. Zealer leaned closer. The words were unclear at first, then sharper fragments emerged. He heard the name of a place he did not know, followed by the sound of orders spoken in the human language. The tone was commanding, urgent, as if the man was giving commands on a battlefield. The nurse nearest to the bed looked at the doctor with wide eyes. The patient's brow was furrowed, his jaw tight. The fingers of his uninjured hand curled as if gripping an invisible weapon. The words faded and the man's breathing slowed again, but the effect on the room remained heavy. The staff exchanged glances, some unsettled, others simply curious. Zealer knew what he had just seen. It was not random dreaming. It was memory, the kind that ran deep enough to leave scars you could not see. He had seen it in veterans from a dozen worlds, their bodies resting, but their minds still walking through fire. Later in the cycle, Zealer ordered the room cleared. He wanted quiet to study the patient alone. The hum of machines filled the air. He pulled a stool closer and sat watching the rise and fall of the man's chest, thinking about the fragments. He had heard the urgency, the leadership, the calm under strain. He began to imagine the moments before the rescue, the heat, the noise, the falling beams and debris, and in his mind he could see the man moving forward, again and again, refusing to stop until his body simply could not go further. The thought was interrupted by another shift in the monitors, a human's temperature climbing again. The doctor did not call for coolant this time. He had learned to wait the fever climb high, then broke like a storm, ending suddenly. The scans showed another burst of cellular work, more damaged tissue, replaced, more blood vessels repaired. He made notes in the log, his voice calm, but his mind alive with questions. Every change in his body seemed to have purpose. Nothing was wasted, nothing random. A soft chime sounded from the door, and the rescue team leader entered once more, his scale form casting long shadows on the floor. He had brought a small object wrapped in protective cloth and handed it to Zealer. Say it had been found near the human. In the wreckage, the doctor opened the cloth to find a small metal emblem, tarnished, but still showing the design of cross lines around a central star. The leader explained that the miners had said it was a mark of rank among human crews, perhaps military, perhaps something more. Zealer placed the emblem on the bedside table, his eyes moving between it and the man lying there. It suited him, the quiet authority, the resilience, the way even unconscious he seemed aware of his surroundings. The leader added that before the man collapsed, he had been carrying another survivor toward the exit, even when his own steps were slow and heavy. The survivor had died moments later, but the human had kept moving until he fell. Zealer thanked the leader for the information and promised to share news when the man woke. The next hours passed in quiet, the only sounds of machines and the steady breathing from the bed. Zealer studied the emblem, turning it over in his hands, feeling the weight of it. It was not heavy in mass, but in meaning it spoke of responsibility and service, of choices made long before this medbay. And this day, he wondered if the man had carried it into every battle, every danger, and if so, what kind of life that must have been. Then, without warning, the human's eyes opened fully for the first time. They locked on Zieler with startling focus. As if assessing him in an instant, the doctor spoke calmly, telling him where he was telling him he was safe. The human's gaze shifted briefly around the room, taking the lights of machines, the walls, before it turned to Zieler. He tried to speak, but his voice was hoarse, dry. The doctor offered water, and the man drank in small, careful sips, then leaned back without breaking eye contact. Zieler asked his name. The human hesitated, then gave it in a low voice. The sound of it carried a weight that matched the emblem on the table. The doctor asked if he remembered what happened. The man nodded slowly, saying little, but his eyes told the story. They held a memory of fire and smoke, of the sound of steel tearing apart, the heat that tried to consume everything. Zieler could see it there and knew that whatever else happened, this man would never be just another patient in his records. The brief conversation ended when the human's strength began to fade, his eyes closing again, but this time it was not the heavy rest of unconsciousness. It was a lighter drift of someone who was still present, still aware. Zieler felt something shift in the air of the room. The nurses who returned sensed it too. The man was no longer simply surviving. He was returning, and when he did, the doctor suspected that nothing on this station would be quite the same again. He made another note in the log, recording the details of the awakening, the way the man's awareness had cut through the haze of recovery, the way he had measured his surroundings. Before anything else, Zieler knew those habits. They belonged to people who had learned to live on alert, who had survived too many dangers to ever truly relax. It made him wonder how much of the healing was not just biology, but how much of it was a refusal to let go. As the lights dimmed for the rest cycle, Zieler remained by the bedside, watching the human sleep, the emblem still on the table, the steady beat of the monitors, like a quiet challenge to the universe. Here lay a man who should not be alive, yet was, and each breath he took seemed to declare that nothing would take that from him, not now, not ever. The medbay lights shone brighter as the new cycle began their glow, cutting through the shadows that had settled during the rest period. The soft of the machines filled the air, but beneath it there was a quiet tension, something unspoken that the staff felt without needing to say. The human lay on the bed, his breathing, even his skin, cooler now, but the strength of his frame seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. Dr. Zieler stood at the end of the bed reading the latest scan reports. The data was still unlike anything in the medical archives. His bones had repaired far past expectation. His muscles had regained almost full integrity. The cellular activity remained high, but steady like an army holding its position after winning a long battle. Zieler ordered a series of movement tests, wanting to understand how far the recovery had gone. The nurses hesitated, unsure if the patient could handle it. But Zieler insisted they begin slowly. They adjusted the bed, raising the human into a sitting position. The man's eyes opened without delay, locking on each face in the room, as if counting allies and threats. His breathing stayed calm, though there was a flicker of strain in his jaw. The doctor watched closely, asking if he felt pain. The man replied in a voice still low, but steady, saying he had felt worse. The first test began with simple movements of the hands and arms. The human complied, flexing his fingers, curling them into fists, lifting them, though his left arm had been broken days before, a move with no sign of weakness. Next, they asked him to swing his legs over the side of the bed. The staff, ready to catch him if he faltered, he moved slowly, but with purpose, placing both feet on the floor, the muscles in his legs shifting under the skin, his posture straight despite the burns and injuries that should still hold him down. Before they could stop him, he pushed himself to his feet, standing tall in the center of the medbay, his bare feet against the cold floor, his eyes scanning the room again. It was not the movement of someone testing strength, but of someone ready to act. The nurses exchanged looks, unsure whether to order him back to bed. But Zieler raised a hand, telling him to let him be. The human took one step, then another, each one slow, yet solid, the sensors attached to his body, sending streams of data back to the monitor's heart rate climbing, muscles engaging fully, as if they had never been torn. Then it happened without warning, a sharp spike on the heart monitor. The man's steps faltered, his hand went to his chest, his breath caught in his throat. Alarms blared across the medbay. The nurses rushed forward, but the human waved them back, his teeth clenched, his eyes fixed on the floor. Zieler moved fast, scanning the readings. The heart was under massive strain, the blood pressure dropping, the oxygen level falling, the cellular repair systems firing at maximum speed, as if the body had detected a threat from within. Zieler knew they were watching a crisis unfold. The human's body was trying to fight something deep inside, maybe a hidden injury, maybe an aftereffect of the toxic fumes the rescue report had mentioned. He ordered the med drones to bring stabilizers, but again he hesitated, remembering every time before when the body had resolved its own battles. He told the staff to hold position to monitor, but not interfere. The nurses looked at him in disbelief but obeyed. The man dropped to one knee, his breathing ragged, sweat breaking across his brow, yet his eyes were still sharp locked on some point far ahead. Zealer could almost feel the struggle raging within each second stretched as the alarms continued to hear the man's body rising until it was almost visible in the shimmer of the air above his skin. Then with sudden deep gasp, he drew in breath, and the monitor steadied the heart rate climbing back into its strange but survivable rhythm. The med bay was silent except for the hum of the machines, everyone watching as the human pushed himself back to his feet slowly, but with unshaken resolve. He met Zealer's gaze and said in his hoarse voice that was done no further words, just that the doctor studied him for a long moment, then nodded, understanding that whatever battle had just been fought, it was one no machine could have won for him. They guided him back to the bed, not because he asked, but because the doctor wanted to continue observation. The man sat down without protest, though his posture stayed straight, his breathing already calm. Again, the data on the monitors showed that the crisis had passed. But Zealer knew this was not the end. There was something in the man's biology that seemed ready for war at any moment, never resting, never letting down its guard. Later in the cycle, while the human rest of the senior administrators came to medbay, their voices low but urgent, they had been reviewing the reports and were concerned about keeping such a patient aboard. They worried about unknown risks and unpredictable reactions. Zealer listened in silence until they were done, then told them that removing the patient now would be a mistake, that what they were witnessing could not be recreated in any lab and might never be seen again. The administrators were not convinced, but they left the matter in his hands for now. When the human awoke again, Zealer decided to speak more directly. He asked about the emblem left on the table. The man looked at it for a long moment before saying it was earned in service. Not given, he did not explain further. But the way he said it told the doctor everything. It was a mark of survival, of leadership, of choices that demanded more than strength. It was a mark of someone who had carried others through storms and fire. The hours that followed were quieter, the human eating small portions of food, drinking water, answering only what he chose to answer, yet always watching the room, always noting where each person stood and what they were doing. Zealer recognized the habit as one he had seen in veterans who never stopped scanning for threats, even in safe places. It was both a sign of discipline and a reminder that such people lived in a world most others could not imagine. Then, near the end of the cycle, another warning flared across the monitors, not as sudden as before, but steady and rising. The oxygen level was dropping again, this time slower, but persistent. Zealer moved quickly, scanning for causes, finding fluid in the lungs, a dangerous complication that could drown man. For within, the nurses prepared to intervene, but again Zealer hesitated, then after a moment ordered them to stand by. The human's body had answered every threat. So far, perhaps it would answer this one too. They watched as his breathing deep in his chest, rising and falling in powerful rhythm. The fluid level began to shift, slowly breaking down into smaller traces of the body, absorbing and clearing them. Without any external aid, it was a slower battle, but one fought with the same tireless force. Within an hour, the levels had dropped, the danger fading once more. When it was over, the man leaned back on the bed, his eyes closing, not in weakness, but in rest. Zealer stood beside him, watching the numbers on the screen level out the staff, whisper in the background words like impossible and unreal. But the doctor said nothing. He simply noted the events in the log of his mind, already turning toward the question of what would happen next, because every crisis so far had only shown that this human's limits were far beyond anything the galaxy believed possible. The medical chamber was quiet except for the low hum of the life support systems as the alien doctor moved around the bed, checking the strange human. Lying there, the screen showed numbers and graphs that should have meant certain death for any other living being in the galaxy, but somehow the human's body kept fighting, kept preparing itself in ways the doctor could not explain. He had seen many species in his years of service, seen their strengths and weaknesses, seen them heal and seen them fail. But this human was different, and every hour that passed only deepened his confusion and curiosity. The doctor adjusted the scanners and watched as the human's heart rate slowed for a moment, then suddenly jumped back to a strong, steady rhythm. It was like watching a machine that refused to shut down even when all the power had been cut off. He stepped back and let out a long, slow breath, his three eyes narrowing as his mind raced through every medical record. He knew there was nothing like this in the archives. No species had the ability to endure such trauma, and yet here it was right in front of him. In the corner of the room, the alien assistant shifted nervously, its long fingers tapping on the edge of the console. The assistant whispered in a low voice, asking if they should prepare the final report for the High Council. The doctor shook his head slowly, saying they could not report yet, because there was something more happening here, something they did not understand. and to send a report now would only invite the wrong kind of attention. They needed time. They needed to see how far the human could go before the body finally surrendered, if it ever did. The human's breathing was uneven for a few minutes, then it steadied again. The wounds across his chest and side had closed faster than the alien medicine predicted. The regeneration was crude, not as clean as medical healing pods would produce, but it was natural and far more efficient than anything in their technology. The doctor found himself leaning closer, almost fascinated by the way the skin knitted together without external help. He had seen predators from the harshest worlds die from smaller injuries, yet this human kept pulling life from somewhere deep inside. A faint sound came from the human's lips, and the alien doctor froze. It was not a groan of pain nor a confused noise of waking. It was a word, a single soft word in a language the doctor did not understand, but the tone was calm, steady. It carried no fear. It was like the human was speaking to someone unseen, someone important, perhaps a memory, perhaps a vow. The doctor's hands hesitated over the instruments. He felt like he had just witnessed something private, something sacred. The assistant asked if the human was waking, but the doctor only raised a hand for silence. They watched as the human's eyes flickered beneath closed lids, a sign of dreaming, or maybe reliving the fight that had brought him here. The doctor remembered the report from the rescue crew. The human had been found in the wreckage of a battle zone, still holding a weapon, still breathing despite wounds that would have ended any other soldier. The crew had carried him back, expecting he would die within minutes. But those minutes had turned into hours and days, and now into a week. The doctor's mind wandered to rumors he had heard about humans before meeting one in person, tales of their stubborn, their dangerous adaptability, their strange drive to keep moving forward. Even when reason said it was impossible, he had dismissed those stories as exaggerations told by soldiers who wanted to make their enemies sound more terrifying. But now he was starting to think those stories were not enough to explain what he was seeing here. This was not just stubbornness. This was something older, something deep in the core of their being. The chamber lights dimmed as the station shifted into night cycle. The doctor did not leave. He sat in the chair beside the human's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. There was a rhythm to it, like the steady beat of a drum in a distant war march, and the doctor wondered what battles this man had fought, what losses he had endured, and why he refused to let go. He had seen warriors cling to life out of fear, but this human's face was calm. Even in unconsciousness, there was no panic, no desperation, only quiet determination. Suddenly alarms flashed on the monitors. The human's body temperature began to rise. Sharply, the assistant rushed forward, but the doctor stopped him, telling him to wait. The human's body was reacting to something, maybe fighting off an infection, maybe pushing to the last stage of healing. The graph showed stress on every system, the heart pumping faster, the blood carrying more oxygen, the muscles twitching like they were ready for action. Even while the mind slept, the doctor realized this was no ordinary fever. This was the human's body preparing itself for something. Minutes passed with the temperature climbing higher and higher until it reached a level that should have caused damage. But instead, the readings showed the cells strengthening, the wounds sealing completely. The doctor had to fight the urge to call in other medics, because part of him did not want to share this discovery. Yet it was too rare, too important to risk interference. He leaned closer, watching the sweat roll down the human's skin, the smell of heat and salt filling the air, and then without warning, the temperature began to drop back to normal. The assistant looked at the doctor wide-eyed, asking what had just happened. The doctor had no answer. He simply said they would record everything and review it later. For now, they would continue to observe. But inside his mind, he was thinking of the larger implications. If humans could survive this, what else were they capable of? What limits could they break in the heat of battle? What wounds could they endure while still moving forward? He imagined an army of such beings, and a shiver ran through his spine, not from fear, but from awe. Hours later, the human's eyelids finally opened, his gaze steady and sharp, as if he had never been injured. The doctor almost stepped back, because there was something in those eyes, something unbroken. The human did not speak right away. He looked around the chamber, took in the alien faces and the strange equipment, and then focused on the doctor for a long moment. It felt like the air between them was charged with some silent exchange of recognition, that both of them had just crossed some invisible line into understanding. The doctor spoke first, asking if the human could understand him. The man nodded slowly, his voice low but strong, saying he needed to know where his crew was. The doctor hesitated, telling him the battle site had been empty when they arrived, and they had found no other survivors. The human's jaw tightened, but his eyes did not dim. He asked how long he'd been out. When the doctor told him a week, the man simply said then, "I am late," and tried to sit up. The doctor moved to stop him, but the human's strength was already returning faster than the readings could track. The doctor realized in that moment that there was no keeping this man in the bed for long. He was already thinking about his next move, his next mission, as if his body's miraculous survival was just another step along a path that would not end here. The alien doctor felt both excitement and dread, because he knew the human would not stay under observation much longer, and whatever came next might reveal even greater mysteries about what it meant to be human. Under the dim glow of the medbay lights, the alien doctor's many eyes watched the human. Closely, the man was lying on a reinforced table, breathing slow, but steady as skin, pale, yet warm as pulse, strange to alien ears, but still strong, and the doctor could not believe what he was seeing. Because by every law of biology, this human should have been dead days ago. The wound in his side was deep from a plasma shard, the infection from the alien. Jungle should have consumed him, the toxins alone could kill a dozen other species in minutes, yet the human was alive, his chest rising and falling, as if nothing had happened, and the doctor's mind raced, trying to understand how. The doctor remembered the moment the human was brought in, carried by two soldiers, whose scaled arms trembled from the weight. The human's gear was burned as blood, soaked into alien armor, yet his eyes were open, staring into the doctor's face with a strange calm, like he knew he was not going to die, even though the doctor could see his vital organs failing. The med team worked without pause. They poured healing serum. They sealed ruptured veins. They pumped him with antitoxins that would shatter the cells of other species, but still the human's body fought in its own strange way, knitting tissue faster than any medicine. The doctor felt his claws shake while suturing the wound, thinking this was madness, but also that maybe he was witnessing something beyond science. Hours later, when the human stirred and asked for water, the doctor froze. No patient had ever spoken so soon after such trauma. The doctor handed him a flask, his alien hands awkward around the small human grip, and asked how he felt. The human smiled weakly and said it was just a scratch. The word sounded absurd to the doctor's ears, but he also felt something he had not felt in decades, a spark of respect, maybe even awe. The human lay back and closed his eyes as if ready to sleep for a year, yet the monitors showed his body repairing itself faster with each passing minute. The alien soldiers whispered outside the med bay, saying the human was not just lucky. They said he was cursed, blessed, chosen. They argued in hushed tones that maybe humans were born from war itself, forged by environments so cruel that no alien world could match, and the doctor found himself wondering if they were right for in his long career. He had treated warriors from 50 worlds, yet none had lived through what this human had endured and still had the strength to speak. Days passed, and the human recovered enough to sit up. He asked for food, and to the doctor's surprise, he requested something solid, not broth, not nutrient gel, but real food. The doctor warned him his stomach could not handle it, yet the human insisted. And when he ate the entire meal, without a flicker of pain, the doctor knew this was not just resilience. This was something built into the human frame, the ability to take damage and keep moving, not only in body, but in mind. The doctor decided to test this theory. He placed the human through mild endurance trials, nothing extreme, just enough to measure heart rate, muscle recovery, and oxygen use. What he saw in the results left him staring at the console. The human's vitals adapted instantly to stress levels that would cripple other species. His cells shifted energy sources like a machine switching fuel types. And when the doctor asked if he felt any strain, the human laughed and said this was nothing compared to training. Back home, one night, as the ship traveled through silent space, the doctor sat with a human in the med bay, the stars passing slowly beyond the viewport, and the human began to speak about his world, about freezing mountains where wind cut through armor, about deserts where the air itself tried to burn the lungs, about oceans so vast and violent they swallowed cities whole. And the doctor listened, realizing that the human survival was not a miracle, but the result of a lifetime in a world that demanded toughness. Every single day, the human was a product of constant trial, forged in an environment that offered no kindness, and yet he smiled when speaking of it, as if he loved a harsh home. The next mission came sooner than either of them expected. The crew was deployed to a hazardous asteroid mining site, a place with shifting gravity, unstable tunnels, and storms of metallic dust. The alien crew prepared with heavy suits and layered shields, but the human simply tightened his harness and stepped forward ready. Without hesitation, the doctor wanted to protest, yet also felt a strange confidence that if anyone could walk out alive, it would be this human. During the mission, a collapse struck the mining tunnels. Alarms screamed through the comms, and many crew members were trapped. The human was the first to rush in through falling debris, his suit taking impacts that dented the plating, but he kept going, dragging injured crew out one by one. Even when his oxygen meter dipped into danger, He kept moving, and when the last alien was pulled free, the human staggered out, coughing yet grinning, and told the doctor he would be fine before collapsing into the med bay bed once again. The doctor treated him through the night, feeling that familiar disbelief return. Every scan told him the human should have been incapacitated for days, maybe weeks. But by the next morning, the human was sitting up asking about breakfast again. The doctor could only shake his head, wondering if humanity's greatest weapon was not strength or speed, but the refusal to surrender. By the time the ship returned to station, the story of the human had spread through the fleet crew, spoke of him in mess halls and training yards, calling him the unbroken survivor. Some said it was luck, some said it was biology, but the doctor knew it was more than that. It was a mindset, a way of facing the universe, without flinching even when every instinct screamed to stop. On the last night before the human's next deployment, the doctor approached him and told him he had studied hundreds of species, and none had shown such defiance of death. The human only smiled and said that back home they had a saying, "What does not kill you makes you stronger." The doctor thought about those words long after the human left the med bay, and he wondered if perhaps that was the truth of it, that humans were not the strongest or fastest in the galaxy, but they had a will that nothing could break. When the human finally walked away down the corridor, his steps steady, his eyes clear, the doctor felt something shift inside himself. He realized he was no longer just observing this strange creature. He was rooting for him, hoping that wherever the human went next, he would continue to prove to the galaxy that sometimes survival was the greatest victory, and that in the vast, cold expanse of space, there were still beings who could stand against impossible odds and walk away breathing.